Hey, good morning, everyone. We're at 10:32, and we've got a good bulk of people that have joined us. We might get some more coming in bits and pieces, but I think probably best to kick off now. Thank you all very much for joining us. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that wherever you are dialing in from today for today's session and/or listening to online with our recording being put up on the internet, we're joining you from the land of Aboriginal people, which was never ceded, and I pay my respects to the Dharawal people, whose land I'm joining you from today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the contribution and leadership that our Aboriginal colleagues make in this system every day, and the importance of this work to progress the outcomes of Aboriginal children, families and communities. I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Brianna Yorgite. I'm the Director for Family Preservation and Child Protection in DCJ. My team's responsible for leading the recommissioning of family preservation services. We'll be running our session today in a similar form to which we ran the foundational elements briefing session the other week. This is effectively me talking at you about the detail of the draft program specifications. We'll be recording that. We'll also have an opportunity for people to submit questions on Slido, which we can then come back to in written form afterwards. We will not have kind of mics on for a kind of verbal Q&A, and ask that you kind of reserve any questions that you would ordinarily put in the chat and put them through on Slido, and keep the chat for technical problems if you have any. So thank you all very much. I also just want to note, as we do every time we speak, we're very conscious that different organisations have various AI tools that operate in the background. We ask that you please disable those tools. We will have this information available publicly on our website, so it's really important that we have that as the kind of source of information. Today, we'll be talking through the program specifications in detail. As I mentioned, we won't be picking up other elements of recommissioning in particular. I'll give you a brief update on where we're up to on things and what next steps are, but really are trying to use today to focus on building out and verbally talking through the material that was contained in what were is quite an extensive document in terms of the draft specifications. So, just an update on where we're up to on things, and positioning this in the context of a journey that we've been on. You will all appreciate last year we issued a discussion paper for family preservation, probably about this time last year or not far off it. You all kindly responded to that. Before Christmas, the department released its foundational elements paper, which clarified the kind of effectively the foundational elements of the high-level position of the department in response to that. We held a briefing session on that last month. That information is uploaded, or that session is recorded and available on our website, alongside some FAQs where we know that stakeholders had specific questions. We're really keen to make sure that we can answer questions that you have and make that available to all stakeholders, so in full kind of transparency and fairness. The draft specifications are a really big milestone for us. They are adding more meat onto the bones of things that you have been asking about for quite some time. They're are quite foundational to how we will be commissioning family preservation going forward. And we wanted to get those out to you as soon as we could. I'll go into this a little bit more, but they are draft, and we will have different iterations of these over the coming months and year. We realise that there is more information that the sector would like to know, in particular around our approach to funding and investment, and our procurement timeframes and approach. I'm not in a position to talk about that in a great amount of detail today, but just to signal that we are conscious that you are hungry for that information, and we have plans to communicate that in the near future. So just encourage you to bear with us as we get increasing levels of detail available to you. So for today's session, here is a QR code that you're invited to scan. It's in the chat there as well, so thank you, Tatiana, for doing that. If you have broken your camera on your phone, which is easy to do, you can go into slido.com and add the number. It's pretty easy to use. If at any point through this session you have a question that you would like us to answer, I obviously won't be able to do that in today's session, but we will formally come back to you in writing at the relevant point. So we will keep that open shortly after the session as well. And then if you miss that window of opportunity, thanks, Tatiana, you can also reach out. We'll have our email details at the end of the session as well. Okay, so into the bulk of the briefing. So here is our overview of the specifications. So these are specifications. Most of you will be familiar with the role of specifications in terms of program design and administration. These are to set out our kind of policy and program objectives, those target groups of what we are looking for, the desired outcomes for the program, and the detail of how that will be delivered. They need to be read in conjunction with DCJ's funded contract management framework, and they will form part of the contracts for delivering family preservation going forward. So they're quite important parts about setting out our expectations and requirements for organisations who will be delivering family preservation in future. These draft specifications apply to the family preservation program as a whole, so cover the breadth of all models and frameworks. We have published these in draft. We will be iterating these with increasing levels of detail between now and new contracts being finalised when they become finalised. And then, of course, as you're all very likely to be familiar, there is the opportunity and importance to keep specifications as live and accurate and contemporaneous documents through the life of contracts as well. So we'll be publishing, so we have published this in draft. We'll have probably other iterations of drafts over the course of this year at key points, and then we'll have a version 1 final version as contracts are signed. The next slide sets out effectively the architecture for how these specs sit in terms of other documentation. So there will be an agreement for funding services, which will have its standard terms, a DCJ schedule to that, these program specifications when finalised, and you will have noticed, if you have read the documentation, an operations manual as well. And the operations manuals will be specific to each framework and model, because they will be of procedural and process detail, where it's important to have that nuance and specificity. So that's the architecture, and that's how all of these things fit together. And just to reiterate how important and foundational these specifications are going forward. As kind of standard in specifications, we've set out the legislative framework in which we're operating. We haven't duplicated the content of the specs in these slides, but just captured some of the key points. And what we really wanted to highlight to you today was the references to the CARE Act, that's the Children and Young Persons Care and Protection Act, and the importance of that Act and the different provisions of that Act in in the context of delivering family preservation. It's incredibly important that providers are familiar with what this Act means for them in different guises, and also the duties of DCJ under that Act and how we can work together going forward. There is also in reference to new domestic abuse legislation around coercive control, which a lot of you will be familiar with, but that is reasonably novel and quite important to our target cohort group. Reference to the Child Safe Scheme and the Working with Children Act. These are pieces of legislation and regulation which you will be reasonably familiar with. I should note, because we have had representations from people thus far, that our reference in these draft specifications about the application of the Child Safe Scheme is not consistent with the draft specifications of TEI. We'll be updating that to make sure that we're aligned to TEI and have a really clear emphasis and focus of supporting the Child Safe scheme through the delivery of this program. So just to provide those stakeholders with that assurance that we've taken that on board and that we'll be picking that up in the next version. The next piece I just wanted to talk through is around the respective roles and responsibilities of different parts of the system when it comes to the family preservation program. You'll have seen that we touched on this in a discussion paper and really identified this as a problem very early on our co-design work, that role clarity was not always particularly strong across our system, and that we needed to be clearer about when, where, how different partners collaborate and work together and who is responsible for different things. So we will be building that out. What's probably most important to note in terms of what is in these specs that we haven't probably expanded before is that our commissioning and planning teams in DCJ will be managing vacancies collaboratively with CSCs and service providers. We'll be using quarterly contract meetings and oversight monitoring and management, and really trying to do that in a very informed and collaborative way across those different bodies. Client level outcome measures and admin data will support with all of that. But it's also worth reflecting that this is an important kind of theme or approach that DCJ will be taking through program management across the piece, not just in family preservation, and is a theme that comes out of things like the out-of-home care system review and in clarifying roles and responsibilities as well. The next thing that's worth noting in these specifications is our program logic. So most of you will be familiar with a program logic. Indeed, many of you participated in the consultation that we had on our draft program logic at the end of last year. So thank you very much for that. The draft of our program logic is included in the specifications. This is building on that consultation and the insights that people had from that. If you have a keen eye, you might have spotted the difference between what we had consulted on and the approach that we have now. Effectively, if you haven't gone through that with a fine-tooth comb, what we have done is revise the language to make sure it is more strengths-based, child-focused, family-centred and trauma-informed. So really taking that on board, that we probably weren't in a strong enough position on those things. So we've refined that language. And we've also added more information about program inputs, evidence and risk factors, and used a more kind of growth and strengths-based focus as well. So that's as a kind of general rule what the difference is. On the service activities, we've changed some of the terminology, so you might have spotted this as well. When we consulted, we used the term mandatory. We have replaced that with required, just to avoid any kind of misunderstanding, because we use the word mandatory when we talk about reporting, and that can be confusing. So we've said required, and we've replaced discretionary with optional. So this was just a kind of a better reflection of how people understood language. And we use the survey responses that people gave to inform which activities would be delivered to all families under Families Together. So thank you again. So I think, you know, the picture, the next picture just really shows, gives you the visual of what that program logic does. And if you participated in that consultation, you would have seen that. So just really clarifying what the client's needs are, what we're trying to do to help, and what will change for clients, or what we intend to change for clients as a result of that in terms of outputs and outcomes. So, pardon me. The other piece that we have built out a little bit more in the draft specifications is around the frameworks and the approach that we're taking to the frameworks. So we have discussed kind of publicly and published our approach around core components and service activities. We've also introduced the concept of practice approaches that underpin that as well, noting that activities are a helpful and necessary requirement to obviously deliver a program, but practice is also incredibly important, and that we want to make sure that over time we solidify our practice approaches that will support the delivery of high quality service to clients and the outcomes that they need to achieve. So this is a conceptualization of how these different things fit together. We have not developed practice approaches, as you will notice. We will be going through a process to do that. And that will kind of build off the consultation that we've done on the service activities thus far as well. Other elements of the program which are worth mentioning. So one is around service availability times. Again, those who will have read the specifications will have identified that we are expecting providers to deliver services between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. Monday to Friday. This is based on some work we have done on costing the services or the models and frameworks. Information will be provided on that in due course. But this is really important because we know that families need support in the hours before school and work and in the evening, and that's sometimes the most effective times for intervention. In terms of specifically what this means for different providers or different families or different frameworks, we can work with you from that, but this was just to be really clear that we expect service provision to operate in those hours. The second element is around the brokerage policy. We know that brokerage has been a challenge for everyone and continues to be, and clarity around that is really important. So we have included and will be including brokerage in terms of our unit costing. The policy itself we will need to develop. We want to do that properly because we know that it can get complicated, particularly when there's multiple agencies working with families, and in particular when DCJ has an open and allocated case. We want to do that work properly and give you that clarity, but we really wanted to signal that that is a significant part of the program and the cost of the program, and so have put effectively a placeholder in there for that. And then in terms of the service duration, the service duration looks different across different models. So if we flick on to the next slide, that really sets out the different approaches. Just to summarise it, Families Together is on average a 12-month service duration. We acknowledge that some families will have a service that completes sooner than that and some families after, but on average we are looking at a 12-month service duration. AFP acknowledgement that we were not able to reach a clear view across all ACOs about what the service duration for AFP would be, but we will need to develop and refine that over the course of the coming years on that and use data to inform that approach and what the most effective service duration is for clients. FFT and MST are both 6 to 9 month programs, and the BOO is up to 18 months as well. So just wanted to get that real specificity and clarity across the duration of all models. Other aspects which are worth noting, so we have tried to call out and be clearer around the approach to reporting risk to DCJ. We know that there are challenges in our system where mandatory reporters, like service providers, are required to perform their duties under the Care Act, and that sometimes that is challenging administratively, whether DCJ has an open case or not, and how we have information flows which are efficient and effective at protecting children. So we are making sure we are clear on what the legal responsibilities of providers are, and we know that we need to do further work, and this kind of comes onto the second point here around information sharing and collaboration, further work on how we can on a pragmatic level, work between agencies to share information in an effective way. And some of these processes will be built out in the operations manuals as we develop those. The next piece is around the practice approaches and tools. As I mentioned, we will be developing practice approaches. There are some specific references in here to a couple of different things. The called service and Aboriginal cultural safety framework are two specific things. So we had previously referenced the Aboriginal cultural safety framework in our foundational elements paper. The called statewide service, we had not done that. So again, those with keen eyes will have spotted that we will be commissioning a called statewide service to support NGOs delivering families together to work with called families. We will be providing more information on that in due course as well. But effectively, it is a complementary approach to families together. We've also mentioned the common approach to risk assessment and safety, the CARAS framework for domestic and family violence. Just worth a shout out that this is the same work that had previously been referenced in our discussion paper. It had been called the CRAMP at that time, which is acronym I actually can't remember now, but effectively a big piece of work that's happened in our women's and DV area of DCJ through University of New South Wales to develop a common approach to assessing risk and responding for victim survivors of domestic and family violence, and making sure we have a clear and consistent integrated understanding and approach to that across the service system. More information will be provided on that in due course. It's not available at this stage, but it's certainly something we want to signal to service providers as an important aspect of our approach. The final requirement or kind of strand worth mentioning is around the program implementation. We will be supporting program implementation with dedicated funding and approaches, unlike what we have been able to do previously. This will include operational material and resources, practice approaches, communities of practice and working groups, and workforce development implementation supports. We'll provide more information on that later in the year as we develop all this up, but really thought that it was quite important to signify that it will be a feature of the program delivery, and that service providers can expect DCJ to play a role in that directly, and to be working with other providers of those sorts of implementation supports. Apologies. So the next slide, just again, I think I picked this up in the previous points, but an Aboriginal cultural safety framework is being scoped, and we will also be in due course scoping a cultural and linguistically diverse cultural safety framework as well to inform the approaches that we take. This is a rather dense slide, but quite a handy one. We know that people had made some strong representations around what clients should be eligible and suitable for family preservation, and what referral pathways should be prioritised for clients. The the government has noted those representations. The position on that was reflected in the foundational elements paper, and that's effectively the position that this is a program for children, or for the families with children who are suspected to be at risk of significant harm, and that we are trying to make sure that as many of those families are appropriate and can be accepted and serviced by a family preservation service as possible. So being very purposeful about where families will not be suitable, the default being that they are. And that 90% of referrals will be for DCJ, either from triage or from an allocated case, and 10% will be from community. The draft specifications build that out a little bit more. We also are noting that there will need to be further kind of process design and articulation through different guidelines and forms, which will flush out through through different processes, and that this will be supported by various data and analytics. But effectively, that is the settled position of the government, and we are just going through our approaches to map out how that is all operationalised. So, in terms of eligibility and suitability, it is also worth noting another couple of factors. Whereas previously in family preservation, some models and programs required DCJ to have an open and allocated case for family preservation to be delivered, we are decoupling that requirement. So DCJ's decision to keep open and or close a case is governed by DCJ's statutory framework, mandates, guidance, etc. And is managed on a case-by-case basis. Family preservation is a service that DCJ may refer into for the relevant, eligible and suitable families. There is no requirement for DCJ to have an open case, so i.e. we can refer from triage where there is not an open and allocated case. Likewise, family preservation can be delivered where DCJ has an open case, refers it, and then subsequently closes it while family preservation program continues delivering. We know that this is a really clear and novel approach, and that some providers will have reservations and concerns about how we manage risk to families in the context of this and how people perform their relative statutory roles and responsibilities. And we'll be working this up in more detail through our implementation approach. But just wanting to make sure that we decouple DCJ's decisions under the Act to open and close from effectively eligibility. We've also clarified our position on prenatal, noting that some people have made comments around that. So the language that's in the draft specifications is where there is an unborn child only with no other children in the family or household, or where there are other children in the home who do not meet the eligibility criteria, the family is eligible for family preservation. There is further information in here around being pragmatic around this decision and it needing to be taken on a case-by-case basis. We note that there are a range of other services and programs that are available prenatally, for example, pregnancy family conferencing, which has been rolled out statewide, and other health and DCJ services, which may be more suitable for families who have children who or an unborn child who may be at risk of significant harm when born. And it's just to clarify that's our preferred approach. But as we approach the birth of said child, family preservation may be an appropriate service. So the next one series of slides really talks to our approach on program performance and data collection. So effectively, we'll be monitoring and understanding performance at 3 different levels. So at the first is the kind of program level overview, and this is really the purview of us as the kind of system stewards and across the program to really understand how well the program at large is achieving the objectives and outcomes for clients. And so that's the overarching approach. The second is around for each model or framework, how each of those are achieving the intended outcomes and the relative efficacy of different models and approaches and frameworks. So really trying to understand what that looks like. And then the third is at the provider level. So each service provider being clear on what is being delivered and the outcomes that are being achieved as agreed through the contract. And the ability to provide ongoing capacity and capability to deliver the service in an uninterrupted and stable way to support families and indeed system performance more broadly. So the next slide is again rather dense, but talks to a bit around our approach to this and what will be included. So we have thought in quite detail about the types of metrics that we will need to collect and how we will need to collect them, particularly for the two new frameworks, Families Together and AFP. And will be and they're discussed in the draft specifications and will form part of the contract. This builds upon the work that we've done previously on developing our minimum data set and a rollout of InfoShare. So this should not be news to people, but it's probably our cleanest articulation of our approach here. We've noted that there'll be an establishment period, sometimes kind of known as an initial implementation period of 12 months for providers of these two frameworks to establish and get up and running before we kind of move into the territory where these metrics will be used for performance purposes. So we've spelled that out a little bit in the draft specifications and we'll be providing kind of more detail on that in due course as well. The next slide sets out the program outcome measures. So some of the measures that I discussed, so really important that we're clear on how we're measuring client outcomes for that. This is tied to the work in the program logic and the consultation that we conducted in the last quarter of last year. The establishment period I mentioned is worth also mentioning that this is aligned to the New South Wales Human Services Outcomes Framework, so making sure that we are being smart about the data that we collect and how it can link to broader data sets to understand what's going on for clients and what is influencing outcomes where it is beyond family preservation, and obviously using those measures to also inform the program evaluations that will come towards the tail end of the contract period. The mechanisms by which we'll collect the data are on the next slide. So I've mentioned previously the InfoShare quarterly data entry, which we'll continue to do. We'll be looking at consistent systems for understanding and monitoring vacancy reporting and managing vacancies. There'll be the regular contract meetings and annual accountability. MST and FFT also have their own specific model requirements, which will continue. So that brings us to the end of the key aspects of the specifications which we thought were worthy of spelling out verbally. Obviously, it's a lengthy document that has a lot of richness and detail and nuance in it. I strongly encourage you to read over that a couple of times at different points. You might pick up different things depending on what is at the forefront of the mind as you're reading that. We have the Slido, as I said, the Slido QR code or thing there that you can lodge any questions with now and for the next piece. We also, and I'll come on to this, have our family preservation mailbox. So as you do read it, appreciate, it's quite a lot to comprehend. In a short period, we'll have other mechanisms. So in terms of our next steps, as I mentioned, we'll be having operations manuals for each models. We are developing those over the course of this year, and they will be made available as we come to the finalising new contracts, because that will be an important part of those contracts. We are conscious that we will need to conduct procurement beforehand. So we'll have some parallel streams of activity in my team to do that work. We will scope the terms of reference for the working groups that we've committed to, and be looking to do that from next year when new contracts are in place. We are very conscious that we don't want to have these sorts of conversations where people aren't clear who is going to be providing what in the new world. And as I mentioned previously, the specs will be iterated over the course of the next year. Noting that you are all very, very keen to understand, next slide, thank you, Tatiana or Deanne. Noting that you're all very, very keen to hear about what is going on procurement and when, I just wanted to give you this detailed information about how you can keep in touch. So we are, as our program team, very keen and committed to getting information to you as full and as quickly as possible. We will send information out via emails. Most of you will be on our mailing list. We will post information on our website. However, there are also some other means by which you can make sure you are notified as procurement information does become available. That is on the that is on the slide here. You should be trying to register through the Procurement Central. You get notifications through that support. So there's a website there, and there's also an email address. In addition, there's also New South Wales Government, the Buy New South Wales Supplier Hub scheme, where notifications get sent out. It is a bit of a belt and braces to sign up to both, but if you are anxious about hearing news and hearing that quickly, suggest you sign up to both of those things, and indeed, of course, our mailing list as mentioned. Throughout this process, we strongly encourage you to talk to your peaks. So the next slide just sets out who the lead contacts are in the different peaks. So FAMS, we have Susan. Thanks, Susan. And I see you've popped a note in the chat about a debrief as well. Alira is the lead for ABSEC, and her email address is there, and Aqua, pardon me, and we have Carolyn's email address there. Really encourage you to reach out to those guys. If you have questions which you do not feel comfortable raising directly with DCJ, or you want other kinds of support and discussion as well. So we have the next slide. As another reminder, here is the Slido QR code. It's in the chat. And then the next slide, of course, has our family preservation mailbox, family preservation at dcj.newsouthwales.gov.au, and our microsite or website as well. I think we will leave it there. I hope that has been sufficiently clear and coherent. My apologies for my coughing and spluttering and nasal voice. Please reach out if you have questions or concerns about anything on family preservation. We are committed to making sure that everyone has clear and consistent information as possible. We are also very conscious that at these sorts of stages in the recommissioning cycle, rumours can abound. I encourage you to look at the source material for the truth of our position on things, and or to reach out to us directly. Please exercise caution if you hear things which are not written down from our program team more broadly, or through official communications channels. So thank you very much. Thank you, Brett. That's very kind. And we'll be in touch soon, hopefully with more information about the approach to procurement and the approach to funding and investment. So thank you all very much. Take care.